Dragon. Hi everyone, I'm Keirron. I'm doing a talk on continuous integration and automation. If you don't know what that is, I will get into that very shortly. The title is Value Your Time and Don't Do Something Twice, I guess, except make a game. Just don't make the same game twice. So I'm Keirron, I'm a project lead programmer at A Few Dragons, which is the company I run. I do that in my spare time. During the day, I'm a software engineer, which is how I learn all this amazing and scary stuff. And if you play Among Us with me, I'm always sus. So continuous delivery. If you don't know what it is, it's the sort of practice of always making something available to be made and continuously built, so you're not doing the work yourself. A good example, I guess, would be for anyone who uses source control, you can make commits and there will be some machine in the cloud magically that will be like, hey, you made a commit, and it will start building your Unity, your Unreal, your game maker software, your little HTML website, whatever it is, it'll start building that, and hopefully you've set it up to deploy where you want it to as well. The benefits in this, you can catch build fails error, you can catch them early, you can see when it happens, and you can continue working on while doing this. So the biggest reasons why, I think the best one is that you can work faster. So I don't know if anyone else has this issue, but when I sometimes do builds, they can lock up my machine for a good 5 to 10 minutes, which means I'm walking away or doing something very not intensive on my computer, usually scrolling Twitter. So by offloading this onto a cloud or another box, if that's what you so do in your household, we can continue working. I can just make a commit, then get on to the next thing while that works away. What I also think is that we can trust a build pipeline more. If we've proven it works once, that machine's going to do the same thing you told it to do every time. More often than once, myself and people I've seen have gone to do a build, and if there's anything complicated in it, like you have to do some step-by-step process, like, I have to make sure that these DLLs are in the right spot, or that my language files are loaded before I do the build, people will forget that, and then you're going to have this build without like your weapon system or something like that. It's not great. The more we can automate, the more we can get around those issues. And another thing is we can deploy more often. If we're getting locked up with builds often, I think that discourages people from building daily. If we can set up reliable platforms and pipelines that kind of get you across that line, and let's say you've got some QAs that are waiting for builds, you can, at the end of every day, just say, hey, kick off a build, you know it's going to work, and that'll deploy ready for them to test straight away. So it provides this like valuable feedback loop of, I can find out more bugs early, and those bugs might be not something that breaks the build, but something that like, I just developed this new system and the next day people are testing it. I can get that fixed and pushed for that straight away. And I don't have to manually go through this build cycle or manually go through all this stuff just to let people test a new build. I've definitely worked at places where when that happens, I'm like, we'll put that bug in the bug backlog, and when we do our new release next month, someone can test it and they'll forget about it, that release, and that bug won't get fixed for 6 months. I try to avoid that as best as possible. I think you make less bugs if you can fix them straight away. So one of the best things about saving time is that we can see how much time we're saving. So I've taken some statistics of how much minutes I save a day doing automated builds. So as we can see, I've got just a Sunday to Saturday chart here. With Monday, I spent probably approximately 15 minutes having the builds running. Tuesday, a lot higher with about 45. Then we're back down to 15 and 15. I've capped these at 5-minute intervals. They usually take between 12 and 16 minutes to build, but it was just easier for this. And Friday, we've gone back up to, I'd say that's about 30, for approximately 2 hours in 1 week. Go up to a month, we can start seeing that each week we're still fluctuating. So more weeks I build more than others, especially working part-time. But we've gone to approximately 8 hours. So in 1 month, I could have spent 8 hours doing something. Well, I was doing something else. But for someone running their builds on their machine, they could have wasted 8 hours. So I've gotten 8 hours back in just my first month of development. The project I'm working on, I've already spent a year working on it. And as you can see from month to month, I've saved approximately 100 hours just on building the project in Unity. I don't know what everyone could do back with 100 hours of their life, but I've definitely fixed bugs, made new features, and just had a lot more time to even just get a bit of mental headspace back. So I definitely think it's worth it. I think the numbers kind of show for themselves it's worth it. I would definitely consider doing continuous integration if you haven't started. And I think everyone's seen this meme, but I think it's just super accurate as to what happens when you can't use your computer. And it happens in my daytime office constantly. So deploying. Once a build's done, that's not the end of the pipeline. We can save that artifact out. We can deploy that to a platform like Steam or Discord, a server, mobile, Android. Some notes, each platform that you add, that's not instant. So I've got a 15-minute build, I'm deploying to Steam, that adds another, let's say 3 minutes. If you have a really large game, let's say you're doing Call of Duty, that's a 100 gig of size, those times are going to go up. What I'm working on is quite small and it doesn't take that much time. So the bigger your title, let's say you're using something that's got like 4K textures and is very or 3D or something like that, that's going to take a bit longer. And the bigger your artifact size, the more it's going to take to upload to Steam. I've noticed that the uploads can be slow on those platforms, probably because they've got a lot of people doing it once. So automating that and not locking up, like especially my internet bandwidth, is really good as well. As I was saying, each platform adds time. So let's say we're not just doing Steam, we're doing Xbox, we're doing PlayStation, Switch, iOS store, Android store, whatever you've got, each of those start adding time. So we can start having a deploy cycle that starts taking an hour. So we have a 15-minute build with an hour deploy cycle. You can imagine the amount of time you've saved. Another note is that not all platforms are easy to work with auto builds. I know with iOS that you, for the most part, you have to get a build, then build that out on a Mac and then upload it, so it gets some manual intervention. I know there are some companies that work around this, but you might be paying a bit more and you might have to change your pipeline to what you prefer, to what works. I haven't come across that in any other platform. It's more specifically an iOS issue. I've known some companies that do get it working. It's just harder. It's just something to know. So that same chart we had before, we've got 1 year, but with deployments now. So we've already gone up to 115 hours. As we can see, Steam takes a bit longer to deploy to than itch.io. It also has a lot more security hurdles around it. I guess the biggest takeaway about continuous integration is that people are not perfect. You won't get the process right every time, as I mentioned before. The biggest thing I see when people do manual processes, one is the funniest thing I've seen is someone typing alpha, and so their version for like a new build was alpap, because like people just mistype stuff, and like when you're sick of building, sick of you want to get home for the day, like you don't double check that stuff. I've seen people deploy the wrong build, so build out to a folder, it's got a list of like your last 100 builds, there's something wrong with the name, so the order's a bit out, so you upload just whatever's at the top of the list, and like something that might be a bit old is going out live to your users or your customers. At the end of the day, I've seen someone forget to upload a build and go home for the weekend. Not that you should be deploying on a Friday, but I have seen it happen. An automatic process wouldn't do this. It would just upload it and you could have gone home already. So many things can go wrong, they will go wrong, so just do what you can to not let that happen. So a lovely story that I do have, I like to watch streamers doing development and stuff. I was watching someone and he was having this trouble getting his build working. He was working in Unreal, I think, which I find a bit harder to build with than Unity. But he started doing this build. I'm like, oh, you could really like improve like your time and not waste your time on stream building out your game, which is taking out half an hour. And he was adamant that his manual process was better than any automatic process that he could make. And he's just like, no, I trust myself to really get the manual process right every time. So live on his stream, he built the game, uploaded it to Steam, and he forgot the language files. So there was all these people being like, why can't I read anything in the game? I'm like, that wouldn't have happened if you had that automated. So just a little lesson that you can eat your own words if you're stubborn about it. One thing that I think is really good about this is we can start automating testing. We can't test everything in games, but we can test a lot of stuff, especially code and sort of graphics quality and things like that. And even frame rates to some extent that I've seen people get testing. So when you build, how much time do you spend testing that everything works? I have spent much time testing. There are places I've worked when we've deployed software, the next 2 days goes to testing that build works before we deploy it. If we can automate as much of that as possible, especially with algorithms and weapon systems or health systems, that like when something gets hit, it should take damage. Like all those things are things that we know should happen, so they should be easy to test. The more that we can build that into our pipelines, I know Unreal Automations has that ability, and I think it's Unity Test Cases, or Unity Test Framework has that ability as well. If you haven't looked into those sorts of things, I definitely recommend it. You're going to get like so much time saved, and there's just going to be stuff that you've tested 1,000 times. You're like, no, I know that works. It doesn't. You've broken it. And it's happened to all of us. As I was saying, automated testing doesn't solve everything, but it can test your core gameplay. If any of those tests fail, we can also stop the build running. We can stop the deploy running, saying like, well, your weapon system's not working. We're not going to post this to Steam and itch.io. We're going to save your users watching you embarrass yourself as this game is uploaded with no firing or no magic or whatever your game has. Other automations. So this just does not apply to games. There's a lot of things that we can automate. One thing that we do at A Few Dragons is we automate our website deploys. So anything that we do that we automate. We've also got automations on a matchmaking service that we're working for another project. That's an interesting one because we've got in our same repo, we've got our repo is a source control thing. I hope everyone who's listening to this talk sort of knows what that is. But we've got the game and we've got the matchmaking service in the one repo. So when we push a build, that will start building out the game itself and the matchmaking service and deploy them to separate places. In some cases, like it'll deploy it to Steam, but it also deploys it to our custom server, which is a lot more work to set up. If you are interested in setting up like custom servers to host this stuff, that's probably for another talk, but it's a lot more work and you're probably going to spend a bit of time. A lot of the time you save will get spent on making custom stuff. So where you can, use the resources that are already on the internet to do that sort of work. I talked to that. The other thing that's really good about automations is notifications. When builds are done or broken or for a number of reasons, that there might be just warnings, you can get notified on Slack, Discord, anything that sort of accepts webhooks, which most chat programs do. You can even get it to email too if that's your preferred method of working. I've seen some people do automations, which is really cool, that for every git commit since the last build, it will collate them into like a change log and saying, hey, this is version 1.6 and these are the things that changed. What that might force you to do is have a better git commit history than I do, because there are many times that I'll just say, this works now. Your users probably don't want to see that. But I have seen the stuff like that. So that companies like that are automating everything, so they're not even running change logs anymore. And I can imagine everyone watching or here is sick of writing change logs themselves. One or more things here is that there's, like I was saying before, there are services out there. If you haven't heard of them, a lot of them will be the same services that offer your source control. So we've got GitHub, GitLab, JetBrains, Atlassian. They're just some of the major few that I found. So GitHub and GitLab are probably the two biggest, where they offer the source control, they offer the deployment runners, they offer sort of the whole suite of pipeline things. What's good about both of those is if you're running on a budget like many indie studios are, they've got 2,000 minutes free of runners per month. A runner is what your build will be running on. So they usually do it as one runner for a free account. So at any one time, you can have one thing building. Let's say that takes 15 minutes to run your build, then 20 minutes to deploy it to all your different platforms. You've used 35 minutes of that runner's time. There would be a little bit extra to set up the runner and shut down the runner afterwards. So that, let's say, 40 minutes in total. So 2,000 minutes per month on one. Like you can almost be building just constantly, which is really good. I don't expect anyone to be building 24/7, but just during your work times or weekends, like get a constant amount of builds out on just the free stuff. Where you can get better with those, if you start paying for services, they start giving you beefier machines that will get those builds done faster. So those times that I was seeing were my 115 hours, they're all done on the free tiers of these things. If I spend more money on that, I definitely think I can get that probably down to about half. I know my machine does it in about half, and I'm using a pretty kitted out machine at home, but they use like the cloud services, and just like whatever's kind of not being allocated to other services is what your builds will be running on those free tiers. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just if you have the money to spare, then you can get stuff done a bit quicker. If you're more inclined to get a bit more technical with what you want, Amazon, AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, they have custom servers that you can build up yourself, and you can have them as targets for runners from your source control. I know Amazon and Azure offer their own source control as well that you can connect pipelines to. I've not used Google Cloud at all, so I can't answer that. These services are harder to use, but you can definitely expand them out more, especially if they're where the servers, you're going to be running like matchmaking servers or game servers themselves. So I know it's a short talk, but if anyone has any questions, happy to answer them. I didn't want to get too technical in this because as you just saw, just like the ones I mentioned there, every person's going to have a different setup. So someone's going to be using GitHub with Unreal, someone's going to be using GameMaker with an AWS setup, and I just can't answer all those questions in one talk, so I wanted to keep it as sort of light on as possible. But I'm happy to, if you contact me after, to go through any build stuff that you would like. So yeah, any questions?
So if you use, say, Unity Plus or Pro, and you do these cloud build things, do you also need to get a license for the cloud?
So if you're using Unity Plus or Pro, do you need to get a license for Unity Cloud? So Unity has something called Unity Teams, which does cloud builds for you. It's a very, they've got one use case, and that is your one using Unity. But if you're using custom DLLs, a lot of like custom stuff that might need extra setting up, and extra steps, it doesn't work great for those. At least not yet. I'm assuming they're going to build that out, but like a lot of Unity features, sometimes they don't get built to the full fruition. That the Unity Teams works with Unity free version and the Unity Plus or Pro. If you're using Unity Plus or Pro, you can still use like GitLab, GitHub, any of those sorts of things, and it will still work fine. It doesn't matter what you're doing. One annoying thing about using the Unity free version is that you will have to activate the license as one of the steps in your pipeline and then deactivate it, which is just not fun. Yep.
You mentioned you updated websites automatically. Can you give an example of that?
Yes, very easily. Like let's say we're updating the homepage, we've got a new game out, we want the hero image on the homepage. We'll change that code, commit it to GitHub. GitHub will be like, hey, you've got some new code, it builds all that, deploys it to our AWS stack, and then it's just live for people to see. There's definitely more complicated ways of doing that. If you use things like WordPress, Squarespace, Wix, they actually do all this in the back end. So if you're not changing like a blog content, if you're changing like the style of your website, you hit save, that's automatically rebuilding your HTML and static CSS and stuff to deploy on their servers. It's doing all that in the background for you, you just don't know it is. And that's how all those services work.
So a question about setting up these pipelines. So if we're going into it with no knowledge of how to set up an automation pipeline, is it an extremely complicated process, and are those sort of services paid or free? Do they like alleviate a lot of that?
Just because you're paying for it, I don't feel they get easier. With a lot of the open source stuff that's come out recently, like the free stuff is just less powerful versions of the paid stuff. That's usually, when you're paying, you're usually just paying for like beefier servers to do this stuff on. The software that runs over the top of it is usually going to be the same. That being said, something like Unity Teams, there's one for Unreal that I can't remember the name of, but you can pay for those, and if you've got the ideal use case that they have, it's going to run a lot easier and simpler for you to set up, and that's what they're hoping for. They don't want people to learn how to do that stuff. They're looking for like, oh, you just want to make a game and you want that to get deployed, or built and deployed. I know Unity supports lots of different Android marketplaces, so if you are using Unity, want to use Unity Teams and are building an Android game, you shouldn't have to touch anything else. But as you can see, that's already a very specific use case. And that's usually like what will happen is you'll get lots of these websites that do charge more, and they'll offer like, oh, we do Unreal builds for this platform, and you can deploy it to Windows stores. So the I guess crux of it there is you will be paying for doing less, but it might be more restricted, is what I've found. Especially if you're including anything in your games that aren't handled by the normal build processor, because a lot of the ones that are pre-set up will be like, all right, we're opening up Unreal. We are going to build with Unreal version X, and if there's anything else you have in there that's extra, like platform-specific stuff, it might not handle that, which is where you start having to be like, well, why are we using this? Hope that answers the question. Yep.
Would you recommend when you build your, like when you're pushing through stuff, to actually have it sort of automatically build it every time, or do you think you should actually do it, like you decide when you want to actually run it?
We do it every time. So we've got our Git setup is we've got a master branch, which that will push to our main Steam store. We've then got a develop branch, which pushes to our test users. We have that built out in Discord and itch.io, so people that have the keys there, every time we build, or every time we commit, a new build goes up and they can test that straight away. We have the minutes, so why not do it, is my first question. If it was like every build cost you this much, then yes, I would say only probably build like if you think you put enough features in needing to test. We have another one, which is our alpha branch, which for anyone that we're like streamers and stuff, we're giving the build to, we do that build out with a different setting that says, I'll only build out these specific scenes and content so that they can't accidentally unlock the special levels that we don't want them to see just yet.
And then one more question.
Yep.
Is, do you then have, when you push, then have your test automation before you push or after?
After, because it needs to build the code first to test what you've just wrote. There are some really advanced things where you can do where like they'll make algorithms that test your code and see like, oh, that's going to break before we even build it. But for most cases, that's extremely hard to set up. So I, for the most part, just build, test that like these systems work. Hey, can I go through the quest system? If I activate each quest, do they all come back as success? And if any of those break, then it'll say, all right, we're going to stop the deploy pipeline here, and we're not going to push that build out live for you. And then it will like email you or send a message on Discord, whatever you set up, saying, here's what broke and here's why. Yep.
You found that pricing from some of the cloud providers gets kind of like exponentially more intense if you build your game that's like 10, 15 gigs plus?
So if using some of the cloud providers, making the game like bigger and bigger, does it get exponentially harder or stuff? I don't think so. Like 10, 15 gig is nothing. I start worrying about like if your game, once it's built, is 60 to 100 gig, like a AAA game, those source files are probably going to be like 400 gig. So you're going to be paying so much money for just a server that can hold 400 gig worth of assets to build it. I know most people that I know in the indie space are probably sitting around the 10 to 15 gig mark. Mine is much lower because I'm a 2D game, but yeah, as long as like it fits within the free tier of those things, you should be fine. You're just going to be paying usually, because you don't need to, you can just pay for, I don't know, with AWS and Azure, just storage extra. So you're like, I want to run the slowest machine, but I want to add 100 gig of storage to it when I build. So you'll just be paying for that storage. And usually like it's only paying for it during that 30 minutes to an hour that you're building. So it's not too much, and especially if you're not building too much. Again, it's going to be one of those things where like every case is different. Someone's going to have like some complicated game that's like 100 meg but takes forever to build for some reason, and then there's going to be people that's like, oh, we just got lots of textures that take up a lot of space, but like it's just going to copy straight to the build artifact. It takes no time to build. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that when you start a project, it takes a while to set up the initial build pipeline, the automation pipeline. Do you find as the project's going, then in your experience, do you end up spending much time upgrading that pipeline, or is it kind of set and forget?
So setting up the project doesn't take a while to set up the build pipeline. Yes and no. The first time you personally set up a build pipeline, that will take a while, just because you're learning it. The second time you do it, like a lot of the same principles change. Like you might have a project that lasts 2 years, and in 2 years you got to do it again. But because you've learned those principles, like the software doesn't change too much. So I've done it a few times before, and for our current project, it took us about 2 days to set up, but I've already saved that time. The only time that I have to go back and change that if I'm adding a new storefront, like let's say we want to go do Xbox tomorrow, I'll have to go change that pipeline to be like, all right, I don't have to change the build pipeline usually, but I have to change the deploy pipeline to say, all right, this one's going to Steam, this one's going to Xbox. That's the only part I'll have to add. So it's, yes, you will have to, if you keep everything the same, no, you should just be able to set and forget it. If you're changing what your sort of goal is, then yes, you have to change the pipeline. All right, we got one more.
I spent most of September trying to build to the Mac store. Are you telling me there are companies that will do that for me?
If you give them money, yes. So the question was, I spent a long time trying to build to the Mac store. Are there companies that will do that for me? Absolutely. iOS mobile is actually harder. You can set up your own automations on the desktop Macs. that will work in cloud because you don't have to. You can build that on like any Linux machine, and then you should be able to upload it to the Mac store. I'm not quite certain, but I've seen it done a few times.
You have to strip the meta files though.
You can get your build process to do that. So yeah, extension to the question, you need to strip the meta files for Mac builds. Yeah, so you can add any custom line. So let's say I want to pull my language files down from Google Drive before putting them into the game because I don't want to be managing them on some text files, and I can get like lots of people to run them in Google Drive. Pulls it down from Google Drive, does some tasks to put that into the build, builds the game, and that's just like one custom way that you can do some cool stuff. But yeah, after the build's done, you can strip meta files. Like there's a lot of things that you can do that will be different for every use case, obviously, but you can automate basically everything. All right, awesome. Thanks for listening. If you do want to know more, you can email me at Keirron A Few Dragons. My Twitter is Hookshot, and A Few Dragons is the company that I made, that I work for and make games with. Happy to talk about anyone's specific problems with this stuff. I definitely believe in it, and saving everyone's time is just beneficial for us all. Thank you.